Yeah, I'm
So
pretty
I think
comfortable.
I would like to start with Shane. And
You will not.
no?
Nope. We will start with welcome to the Two Opinionated Guys podcast. I'm Marshall. This is Aaron, and we're with Pam, and we're with Shane. Right? And then you can start.
Just wanted to get right into it. But I did want to just briefly, because I read through the chapters or parts of chapters that you guys kind of sent over to us. But for anybody listening, maybe Shane, you can offer up some background, and then I'll get to you, Pam, afterward, just in what the book is about and what you guys are kind of writing and what the purpose was behind it.
Okay.
Yeah, certainly. I think, and of course, Pam will elaborate on this more. It's really what is behind the scenes in all of this stuff, and the key players that are involved. And I don't know if you got I put out our book cover. I think Dennis forwarded it to you on Facebook. Maybe not, but
I didn't see the book cover. Yeah.
Okay.
Can I put a little graphic up of it? Is that cool?
Do you want me to send it now to you?
No, I'll put it up later. I'll just put it up later.
Yeah. No, we'll get that to you. But anyway, it's really all about the, which is the reason for the name of our book, COVID Operation, which is basically kind of like an undercover operation that went on, and it is still going on, that has basically crippled our society, crippled our economy, and there are a lot of bad players involved in this, and we address people such as Fauci, Deborah Birx, Bill Gates.
You name names.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, we name names like there's no tomorrow. Trust me.
So Shane, I may interject here and there. So sorry if I do while you're on something. Just for some clarification, you are a biologist, or you study biology, is that correct?
Yeah, so my background is I graduated with a degree in biology, but in addition to that, I also was employed in a laboratory where I did research primarily with cyanobacteria, but also I did a lot of polymerase chain reaction research, DNA agarose gel electrophoresis research, things like that. So
yeah, that all makes sense.
I have a lot.
That's very technical. That's awesome.
Yeah, I have a lot of experience in doing that stuff, and so I have a lot of experience in working with DNA and how all this kind of stuff works, and including virology. So, and that's one of the reasons why Pam wanted to work with me, because it made sense.
How did you guys connect? And maybe we could, Pam, you could tell us your background and then how you guys got together.
Yeah, so my background is I own a company. I'm a naturopathic doctor, and I own a company called Wellness Forum Health. We've been in business for 25 years, and we specialize in informed medical decision making. So we've created these huge libraries of educational programs. We own a school that teaches health professionals how to do this. We have a lot of articles, and it's everything from what to do if you have kidney stones to how to make treatment choices if you have stage 4 cancer. And so my job is, when something happens, to check it out, So when this all started, and we can say this on the show if you want, but it all started in early March when this was starting to be talked about, and I created a video. I looked into it. It was eerily reminiscent of something that had happened before. It turned out that I was right about that. And it just started a firestorm. I mean, I got like 3,500 emails in response to that one video. And I thought, well, boy, people are really interested in this, so I'll look into it some more. And the more I started looking into it, and you'll find this, once you start the investigation process, it's like going right through the looking glass into the rabbit hole. I mean, it's one thing leads to another to another. So I work with Shane's wife, Beth, and I said I wanted to write this book, but I didn't want to do it by myself. I needed a co-author. And she said, well, obviously I'm prejudiced because I'm married to him, but I have a husband who's really the kind of guy you're looking for this book. So we met, and it was really a perfect match because of the stuff that I knew about this. And I was creating a lot of videos and articles and that sort of thing. And Shane brought a totally different perspective that was not only the biology, the DNA, the virology and all that, but he had a lot of economic background also. And there's an economic aspect to this, including some of the motivations of China to do some of the things that they did that is very important to cover and is covered in the book. And that was a lot of that stuff was written by Shane, not only the China motivation, but then the economic fallout and how who benefits when this kind of stuff happens. I mean, there's a chain reaction all over the world anytime something happens, and there are winners and losers, right? So that's how we ended up doing this together.
And have we seen anything, because you kind of touched on it, but, and I haven't read the entire book, obviously, because I haven't had access to it, but have we seen anything like this that would be something that the general public could look back and go, this is a similar situation to that? Or is this a one-off?
No, what happened is it turned out what happened in 2009 was a dress rehearsal, 2009 and 10. And so what had happened, again, I spend my life doing this kind of stuff. I'm a researcher. I've written books before, and I've.
Are you talking about H1N1? Is that 2009?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what happened was, and I don't know how much you know about this story, but there was supposed to be an epidemic of swine flu, and it came from Mexico. And it just, when I tell you this story, and it's worth sharing on the air too. But what happened was we're going to have an epidemic. It's coming from Mexico. So we need to test everybody coming into the country from Mexico for sure. We'll catch a lot of it that way. And so this goes on for a while. The United States was really pressuring citizens to get a flu vaccine. It's always been a hard vaccine to sell. But they scared people enough that there were lines around the departments of health, like here in Columbus, people stood in line in the cold to get a vaccine. And then it kind of like tapered off. And the CDC made this really unusual announcement in conjunction with World Health Organization that, gosh, we're so overwhelmed with all the cases, we just don't have time to test. So just assume everybody showing up with a sniffle or a sore throat has the swine flu, H1N1. And I thought, that's weird, I mean, because nobody I knew in healthcare was telling me the system was so overwhelmed that we had to do that. So I wrote an article and I predicted that there was no epidemic, there was no pandemic, and that they made how they got out from under having to admit it was to stop testing so that you overwhelm the departments of health with these reports of people with sore throats and sniffles, right? Well, after it was all said and done, CBS News, this was back when they were like real journalists with curiosity, decided to look into it. And they have a big budget, much bigger than mine. So under the Freedom of Information Act, they got a hold of the state data and they had to go to court, but they made the CDC cough up their data. And there was no pandemic and there was no epidemic. Nobody coming from Mexico even tested positive for this thing. They just made it all up. Well, in the United States, when you engage in this kind of criminal behavior, they slap your hands and say, you should not have done that. Bad boy, don't do that again. And then they, of course, do. World Health Organization, Margaret Chan was the director general at the time. And in Europe, there were hearings and it was kind of embarrassing. But at the end of the day, Margaret retired with her reputation intact, and she still sits on all kinds of global this and global that, well respected. And they think about $18 billion got squandered on this whole thing for no reason at all. So they got away with it. And so when this first started, the first thing I thought of is, boy, does this sound familiar? We're going to have a pandemic. I'm always interested in these people that have like psychic powers. They already know before when there's 5 people who have the virus, we know it's going to be a pandemic. And I've always been fascinated with people with psychic powers. So I started looking into it. And that first video, I said, this is a hoax. I said it that way. And that's when the firestorm started. I got death threats. It was so unbelievable back in March. And I said, I'm going to keep on investigating this. I'm going to keep on reporting it, regardless of the cost to me personally. And it's been significant. But and
Shane decided he wanted to get on board with that too and be okay with the death threats too, or do you feel like maybe that's subsiding a little bit? Where is it still just as risky to put this stuff out there? Whatever you guys, the information that you're putting out there that's clearly controversial, is it?
Yeah, I mean, the first meeting I had with Pam when we discussed this book, one of the first things she told me is that I just don't give a crap anymore. I don't care. This is too important and this has to get out. And Pam has a lot more exposure than I do, but she's been dealing with this stuff for years. And I'm sure once the book comes out, then yeah, I'm going to start getting some of this crap too. But I'm with her. I don't care. You know, you send it out all you want. Emails, whatever, if you want to criticize me. But our view is that this is just too important to not address the issue.
So when you guys say that it's important, and I don't disagree with you, but I think that there's kind of a phenomenon going on right now, which is that science almost comes in second place to whatever's popular culture, and politics and pop culture go hand in hand, unfortunately. And so what are you guys hoping that this book will do? Because I think we've seen enough cases of, the Ben Shapiro quote, "Facts don't care about your feelings." And, we've seen people tell you like the facts are the facts, and yet popular culture still remains and people don't care. So what are you guys hoping to sort of have happen by releasing this book? Obviously what you're saying seems logical, but it doesn't seem like a popular opinion. Obviously you guys are getting death threats. What is your hope in releasing this book?
Well, I think that I have 3 or 4 things I'd like to see come out of it. It's a story that needs to be told, number one. And I think there are more people who agree with this than you might imagine. I think that we're seeing that happen. I mean, it's a lot calmer, much more supporting stuff than what before. We started this organization called Make Americans Free Again. And we're gathering membership at a pretty rapid clip and getting a lot of national attention for it. So I think that there are more people thinking about this than were before. And I think that the people who planned this made some crucial mistakes and they overplayed their hand. They have vulnerabilities right now. So it isn't all as bad as it seems, and they're not. And here's another thing I'll say. When we started this, there were 3 groups of people. You had the people like us who knew what was going on right away. You had the people sometimes affectionately referred to as the sheep, who are still thinking that this is for real. And this group in the middle that's saying, I don't know what's going on. Sometimes it doesn't seem quite right. But those middle people, they're coming our direction, not going the other way. And the reason is that it's hard to ignore. Our governor tested positive and negative in one day, okay? And then stands up and says, now we have to have faith in the tests. Well, listen, you tested positive in the afternoon and negative in the evening, and you chose the negative one because it lets you live your life, and you're not letting anybody else in the state do it. And now you want us to follow your lead and have faith in the tests. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to say there's something wrong with that. Okay, so that's just one little example. And it led the auditor of state to get involved in investigating the testing thing. So anyway, the story needs to be told. There's another thing that I feel very strongly about, and that is that part of how this debacle happened was too many unelected career officials, and Shane will talk a little bit about that, or a lot about that. Too many unelected officials with too much power over our lives, and no accountability, no oversight, and this is part of what's created this disaster. So I think we have some issues to solve in this country so that it doesn't happen again, because it could happen tomorrow. I mean, what if the person who succeeds Fauci says, you know what? There sure are a lot of traffic accidents and more people are dying this year than died last year. Nobody's driving till we figure this out. Nobody. Park your car in the garage. You get caught driving your car, you're going to jail, you're getting a fine because I said you can't drive. It's no different than what's going on right now, and it could happen.
Yeah. I did feel like it was an odd precedent, and I think we've talked about that now it's been set. I mean, the precedent's been set that government can lock you down, and from what my lifetime, that's never happened, and from what you can see, that really hasn't happened like that. So I don't love that, and I do feel like there's a lot of different things at play. I love that you guys tackle different things with the economy and with the medical aspect, with the politics of it. I guess one of my questions for clarity is, do you guys feel like the coronavirus itself is a real virus infecting people?
Shane?
Oh, you pass it over to me. All right. No. Yeah. It's a good question. I mean, you know, you look at the history, and you know, when you look at the history, first of all, coronaviruses are nothing new. Okay, they've been around since the dawn of time. If you've ever had a cold, you had a coronavirus. Okay, so and a lot of people, especially younger, healthy people, probably you know, kick this thing right off the bat because they already had antibodies built up, because the genetic makeup of the virus was so similar to what they had caught before. So so I mean, no, I mean, the virus, you know, and you go back to Anthony Fauci's history and how he botched the HIV/AIDS situation. I mean, he was pushing vaccines back when they hadn't even isolated the HIV quote unquote virus yet. So there was no connection, but he was still, and he was getting paid a lot of money by big pharma companies, even though they hadn't even isolated the actual virus. So yeah, so there's a lot of questions here regarding that.
So you believe it's a virus, but it's not what the mainstream media or what everybody's making it out to be.
Well,
The coronavirus is a virus.
Yeah, they call it the novel coronavirus, which is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Because there's nothing novel about it. I mean, this thing is, you know, it's just a different strain. Now, we can talk about the origins of it and what China and the Wuhan lab, you know, what their involvement is on that. And we do address this in the book as well. But, you know, this is not anything that's fantastically new. So could it have been prevented, you know, had they not done things a certain way in China? Certainly. But again, we're dealing with death rates that are lower than what we see for the flu that we deal with every year. So,
well,
yeah,
and is there even,
I
I guess I've heard this a lot too. I mean, people aren't dying of the flu anymore right now, right? People aren't dying of emphysema or influenza or any of those things because everything's being marked as a COVID-19 death. Right. So there's,
yeah, well, that's the problem. The problem is,
maybe you guys address this.
Yeah, well, the problem is that part of the job of public health is to gather data so that you can figure out how to respond to something when it happens. And so the tests are flawed. The death certificates have been forged. Nobody will ever know. I think that they'll still be trying to figure it out when I am dying 40 years from now. They'll still be trying to figure out how many cases and how many deaths. And I don't think we'll ever know the answer to the question because they played around with the numbers so much. And in some cases, they've trued up some, I mean, because of lawsuits and that sort of thing. But we'll never know who died of the flu, who died of something else. Who died of the flu, but it was induced, like what happened in New York, where they took sick nursing home patients back to the nursing home to infect other people. You know, so you know, it's a mess. I mean, from a data perspective, it's a mess.
It's terrible. And if you look at the, you know, the CDC guidelines themselves, to add to Pam's point, they are, you know, they specifically say how to, you know, if it is suspected that COVID may be involved, then that's what you're listing on the death certificate. Even though most reputable physicians will not do that. You know, you're going to die from respiratory arrest or, you know, maybe secondarily pneumonia or something like that. But to put COVID on the first line is what the CDC has been directing these doctors to do. And there's been many doctors that have come out. One of them, Dr. Scott Jensen, who has been just ridiculed by the left-wing media for coming out and saying, this is not how this is supposed to be. I've never been I've never had to do this, and it shouldn't be that way. I'm going to be legitimate in how I list and produce these death certificates for my patients. So that's just one example. The testing is another part of it. The testing is extremely flawed. We talked about that. There's basically two types for the most part. There's the PCR test, which I have a lot of experience in, and there's the antibody test. And and they continue to produce both false positives and false negatives. So there's your data problem. So
is that common even within, like, if you were going to get tested for the flu or any other virus, is that a pretty common to get false negatives?
Well, we don't usually do it. I think that's the
Right.
thing that's so bizarre about this, is that usually what happens is every year there's flu season and people get the flu. And some years it's worse than others. And it always hits the same population the hardest, which is elderly people in nursing home with comorbidities. And I don't want to sound hard-hearted when I say this, but it's the truth. If you're 90 years old and you're taking 5 medications and you're confined to bed and it's January of 2020, you're probably not going to finish the year. Okay. Mm-hmm. So something's going to take you out, and it might be flu. And that's what happens every single year. And we've never even isolated those people, because we've understood that what those people want in their final days is not to be protected from the flu. They want to be around their family and friends and their grandkids. And so the cruelty that's been inflicted on the population, that's another thing too. I'm predicting, and this is an audacious statement to make, and we don't make it in the book for obvious reasons, but I think that this will be worse than the Holocaust in terms of direct killing of people that happened as a result of the collateral damage. I mean, there are many counties already reporting that they've had more suicides than COVID cases. They've had more overdoses than COVID, not deaths, COVID cases, all right? And saying we have to stop this nonsense because we've never seen anything like this kind of carnage. And we're losing an entire
and the school
generation.
year hasn't even started. And I bet all those numbers change when the school year starts, because I mean, you have kids not going back to school, you have kids not participating in sports, you have kids not participating in extracurricular activities, whether it be, music or choir or just anything that distracts kids from being involved in terrible things, whether it be drugs or gangs or anything like that. And so you have the side effects of those kids getting into the drug world, and then you have the side effects of those kids just getting depressed because that's their outlet. Their outlet is music, or their outlet is getting involved in sports. And so I bet you'll see those suicide rates go up, unfortunately, if we don't do something.
You're going to see an entire generation of economically disadvantaged kids that are just going to disappear into the ether and become dependent on society.
Well, we already had a bunch of economically disadvantaged kids with the millennial generation, though. So
yeah, well, we do, but you're exactly right. But what I'm talking about is, when we talk about there's a massive amount of parents pulling their kids out of school to homeschool. And we've got a huge homeschool resource center on our Make Americans Free Again website. Helped lots of people get their kids out of school. Well, the people we're working with have resources, they're educated, that kind of thing. So it's all going to turn out great for them. But in Columbus, you can drive probably 20 minutes away from where Shane and I live. We live kind of in the same suburb. And so you can drive 20 minutes south, and you're going to see a situation where the parents are working. Usually it's one parent household, single mom. Mom has to go to work, kids by herself all day, 8 years old, 9 years old, and you got a couple things going on. They don't even have an internet connection that would allow the child to do the work if the kid could do it on her own or his own. And the other thing that's going on, and I just reported on this last week, is child predators know that these kids are home alone. So you got a kid home alone surfing on the net, all right, to write papers or whatever it is that they're doing for school. The predators know how to find them. They know they're there. They know they're by themselves. So the child exploitation has skyrocketed, and it's going to get worse, because if you're a predator, you look for these kinds of vulnerabilities. And so these kids are going to get exploited, and they're not going to learn anything. They weren't learning a whole lot in school before this happened. They're sure as heck not going to learn a lot sitting at home by themselves.
So I'm curious, and Shane, maybe I'll start with you on this question, because my background is more economics. And so a lot of this stuff that I see going on, immediately my mind goes to, it's the Trojan horse for socialism. And everybody kind of rolls their eyes at me a little bit because I blame everything on it's going to be socialism. But Shane, I'm curious from your perspective. You guys put the book out. You get a bunch of people in that centrist point of view raising their eyebrow, going, "Okay, I could see where you're coming from." What is the end game that you're selling these folks? What's the end game of this? Why is this happening, and why are they doing this if all of what you're saying is true?
Yeah, well, one of the things is, and that's why I regret that you guys didn't receive the book cover, because that's one of the, the subtitle of the book is what happened, why it happened, and what's next. And so we definitely address that from an economic standpoint, and just again a little additional information on my background. I've been in the financial services industry for the last 16 years. So I have a very diverse background. So I've been dealing with investments and banking for 16 years, in addition to my biology background, just because I guess I get bored and I feel like I got to move on to something else, who knows? But basically, yeah, I mean, you mentioned socialism. This is most certainly, and I think we address this ad nauseum in terms of the book, as far as the economic impact and what the goals really are of some of these, as we call them, tyrant governors. You have one there in Oregon, and you can pick any state, Oregon, Washington. We had one we thought was not going to be a tyrant governor, but he ended up being one. And there is a concern, and then you throw in the complication, and this is related, even though it may not seem like it is. You throw in the rioting and the protests and the Black Lives Matter thing, and it is certainly political. There's no question about it. And the reason why you have to know it's political is because the data doesn't stack up. It just doesn't, as far as what this virus does or doesn't do. It doesn't add up for the response. No time in history have we ever been told as a healthy person that you got to stay home or take all these different measures to, when the flu numbers are actually worse. And we've been dealing with that for how many hundreds of years. So
I guess on that note, one of the questions I have, because this is one that's hard to put my, I guess, to navigate through, because I can bite off on some of the, and please don't take offense to that when I say conspiracy theories, but there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there, but I can bite off on a lot of reasons as to why this is happening, especially political. And if you're saying a socialist agenda, sure, that could be something, but how did this happen globally? Because there was, if there was a testing ground in 2009, how come this happened in Italy and they shut down all of Italy, and they shut down a lot of Europe and a lot of other countries?
Yeah, so in 2005, the World Health Organization, we know that this was planned. What we don't know is if this particular event was the beginning of the planning, okay? But in 2005, the World Health Organization asked all of its member states to sign an agreement, and it kind of made sense. It basically said if there was ever a pandemic, then we'd all act in unison to protect everybody. And I have to tell you, if you look at it on its face, if there was some kind of bubonic plague that if I walked out of my house, it was going to strike me dead on the sidewalk, I'd want to stay home, and I'd want to think that we wouldn't let people into the country with bubonic plague. Okay, so I don't know that anybody really thought that that was a bad idea. But that's why it happened the way that it did, and they knew that they could count on that. I think the end game here, there are 3 or 4 things that they want to have come out of it, and there are also several things that went wrong for them in the post-mortem. And we can't do the whole post-mortem yet, but the end game is that this group of people think that if you just had the whole world living under one global government, that it'd be better off than the idea that you have the United States and you have Malaysia and you have all these different countries. The second thing, and this isn't a conspiracy theory, Bill Gates actually gets on TV almost every day and says, we just can't go back to normal until 7 billion people get a vaccine. And this vaccine has never been used before. And then the tattooing, which they're doing this in Africa right now, where you get when they give you the vaccination, you get a little tattoo that keeps your vaccination records right in your wrist, so you can have cops walking around with smartphones to tell if it's okay for you to be able to go outside. And this is already starting. There was an article in the New England Journal of Medicine where they were saying that one of the ways that you could get people to comply with this is just say, look, you can't have any government services. You can't use public transportation. You can't go to work. You decide you're going to be a refusenik. Well, you just have to stay home then, or we'll take you to some kind of isolation camp where you can live by yourself. So the mandatory vaccines is part of it. The vaccine mandates were kind of going backwards when this all started, and I think that was a big part of it. I think that the idea of government control, we think that one of the things that went wrong was that had somebody else been president, well, I'll tell you the first thing that went wrong. Not all countries did it. Okay, they never counted on Sweden, Japan, Tanzania, Iceland. That was a big screw up, because now you've got numbers from countries that didn't lock down that look a lot better than countries like ours. The second problem is that what was supposed to happen is the whole country would be locked down, and Trump isn't a nationalist, so he didn't do it. But now you've got people wandering around like us making trouble, writing a book and starting a group like Make Americans Free Again. That wasn't supposed to happen, right? And the next problem is they overplayed their hand on the testing, which is what ginned up all these cases, which is supposed to replace the lockdown that should have been going on right now. Well, now you got all these people saying I made a reservation to get tested, but I never showed up and the test came back positive anyway. And you got auditors of the states looking into that, and that little episode with we call him the emperor, we don't call him the governor anymore, with the emperor DeWine. And so that's not going well. And then they created this dystopian environment for schools. Nobody wants to send their kids to school there anymore. You need generations of educated, stupid people to keep this all going. And then the vaccine mandates don't mean much for school kids if they're not going to school. So what I'm telling you is that this was very well planned and orchestrated, but like a lot of best laid plans, it didn't quite go as it was supposed to go. And the vulnerabilities are, I think we're going to be able to exploit them to get ourselves out of this mess. And then, like I said before, to be able to have a discussion, which we need to have. What is a health emergency? Who gets to declare it? What kind of oversight do you get? Because really, the car analogy is perfect. No driving until there are, we'll start out with, we're not going to drive till we stop having fatalities. Well, now we're not going to drive till there are no crashes. Okay.
So I guess that is a good point, and it kind of leads into a question that I had, which is, what is the precedent that's being set? And is this something that you both think is going to be the precedent going forward, which is, if something happens to society at large, the global society, and the government deems that is this like a test run to just have an authoritarian type government, or what do you guys think is the precedent going forward?
Shane?
Well, I think, first of all, the virus will magically go away on November 4th. I feel strongly about that, and I'm half joking, but
I feel like if if one party wins, they might get rid of it in 2 weeks to say they did something about it. But yes,
right.
Something along those lines.
Yeah, exactly.
Very shortly after the election, things will change. Yeah.
So no, I think that it's going to be looked back. Let's fast forward 10 years from now, and you look back, and maybe some people will tell their kids or their grandkids about this, and it will just be seen as the biggest debacle of all time. It's a joke. It's an absolute joke. And so I think there's some people speaking out about this right now, such as myself, Pam, and thousands of doctors, that legitimate doctors, mind you, not people like Fauci or whatever that that haven't ever actually seen a patient, but legitimate epidemiologists that have come out. And so it's going to be looked back on as a complete farce, a complete hoax, and that's one of the points in the book that we really drive on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
And
on
just
that
like,
note, then you're saying looking back, we'll look on it as a hoax, and I hope that's true, because that would tell me that a lot of people ended up reading your book and going, oh, you guys are right. But going forward, are you guys concerned that this is, as Pam said earlier about H1N1, a trial run or a dress rehearsal for, from now on, whatever the next coronavirus is, when the government wants to shut you down, they can? Like, do you guys think that's a precedent set, or do you think this is a one-off where we go, okay, we'll all learn a lesson, as Shane said, and in 10 years we'll look back?
We can
and
go
go,
all kinds of
not gonna
places
happen.
with that. Pam, I think you probably can cover this one.
yeah, well, I think it's up to us. I mean, at this point in time, what happens after this is either, and I have a prediction I'll make now. I think that one thing that is the good things are going to come out of this. Number one, people are realizing you cannot be a lazy citizen. There are people who haven't voted. I hear from people who say, I haven't voted for 10 years. I'm voting now. Okay. I'm getting rid of this nitwit that's running my state if it's the last thing I do. So citizen engagement is going to increase a lot because people have taken freedom for granted. Like it's just owed to us all the time, and it's not. So I think that's going to change. And I think that that's what will make the discussion happen. I mean, it's somewhat like rebuilding after World War II. What do we do to make sure this never happens again? You know? And so I think that's one thing. I think another thing is the medical system has collapsed. It has collapsed. And that's a good thing, because the medical system was careening toward collapse before this happened, but it has totally collapsed. And an editorial on Medscape that I'm going to talk about in my videos next week, actually written by a doctor who says, you know, people have not been going to the doctor for months and they're not dying. Maybe they don't need so much healthcare, you know? And so that would be good for medicine to have to remake itself in a better way. The education system is collapsing. If 40% of the parents, and I think it's going to be higher, but the prediction is 40% of parents are not sending their kids to school. And I'm not talking about doing the video homeschool type of thing. I'm talking about my kids out, I'm taking over, I'm educating my kids myself. So the education system's collapsed. We've been talking about education reform in this country as long as I've been an adult. Nothing happens, it gets worse every year. Well, this is going to make it better, because you're not going to get those kids back into school unless you do something that makes the parents have confidence in the system, and they don't right now. A lot of parents found out their kids weren't learning anything when they came out of, when they were sent home. So I think that there's an opportunity. The silver lining in this is to say, this is a mess. It never should have happened. The devastation is horrific. We're all going to have to roll up our sleeves and rebuild our country, just like they rebuilt Europe and every place else that was decimated from World War II in a different sort of way. And then we're going to have to rebuild these institutions in a way that is responsible. The media is irrelevant. I mean, they're just irrelevant. And it used to be a very tiny percentage of people talking about fake news. Lots of people are talking about fake news now, because they're seeing it. It's like they're seeing our world is suffering. You know, people are writing to me all the time and saying, I see what's on TV. All they do is they talk about all the people sheltering at home, making cookies with their kids. I'm going bankrupt. You know, that's not what's going on at all.
Sure, but if you're going off that, and what do you say to the people that have a relative or somebody close to them? Like, I know somebody whose brother passed away, and he, you know, compromised immune system, contracted COVID-19, and very shortly passed of it, got put on a ventilator and passed of it. And what do you say to that, or those people with making sure that whatever you guys are putting forth is not the masquerade, or not the, you know, that yours is the truth, right? Because you're saying it's hard to believe what's out there. So how do we navigate through that, and what do we say to those people?
Well, I have something to say about that, because I know a lot about this, the way that people are being treated. The first thing is that patients die of all kinds of things all the time. Every year people die of the flu. Every year, 1 billion with a B people worldwide get the flu. 1 billion, right? And when we were talking about, you know, 100,000 cases in the United States, oh my gosh, everybody's got to stay home and shut down. So it just gives you an idea of the insanity. The second thing is that there's a whole scandal. We have a chapter in the book about the hydroxychloroquine issue. There is a treatment available that prevents and cures most people. So there are invariably, when we start taking a postmortem and look at all this, we're going to see a lot of people who died because the treatment that would have saved them was forbidden, because Fauci's friends, Gilead, take up 9 of the 50 people on his advisory board are with the company that makes remdesivir, which is an abysmal failure during Ebola a few years ago, killed more people than it helped. And of course, that's the drug he wants everybody to use for $10,000 instead of $13.50 for hydroxychloroquine. So we saw some people who could have been saved if they could have gotten the drug. Another thing is that people were put on ventilators who shouldn't have been. So ventilators are end-of-life rescue machines, all right? When a person comes into the ER, you don't put them on a ventilator, very seldom, all right? So they invariably killed some people that way. And the last thing I'll say is, and I want to say this with compassion for the person who lost a family member, we don't know if they died of COVID. We have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
And just to tell you how bad it is, in Colorado, one of the ways that the data got trued up was people in Colorado got letters from nursing homes that said, your grandmother or mother died, whoever it was, and we put the accurate data on the death certificate, and it was changed, and they coded your aunt, grandmother, whoever as a COVID death, and it wasn't. And so these people got angry. I would if it was my relative, and they started calling members of the legislature. So this one guy in the legislature of Colorado got upset, and he tried to have the health director criminally indicted over the whole thing. He made a stink about it. He never got that done. But all of a sudden now they're going to true up the numbers, and the death rate in Colorado went down by a bunch. So my point is that, and Shane had talked about this before too, where they're coding the deaths as COVID when they're not. So my question to your friend who lost a family member, it's unfortunate. It could have been from lack of the right treatment, could have been killed by the treatment, the ventilator, could have been something entirely different because the person was immunocompromised, and it's convenient to code it as COVID because you get 80 grand if you do. All right, there's a financial incentive. So who knows what actually happened. I'm sorry when somebody dies, always. I'm in the healthcare profession. In a perfect world, nobody would die. But in this particular case, we will never know what happened to that person. So it's pretty despicable.
I think you're right about that, and I think that is one of the tough things. And I think that unfortunately we also live in a generation where it's like, and everybody, it's the easy thing to do to complain about millennials, and millennials are all voting, and now we're getting to the next generation. And you guys mentioned that with all the love in the world, they're sheep. I'm curious if you guys think this same panic and sort of belief in pseudoscience could have happened in a previous generation, or if you think that's kind of unique, because I know that a lot of younger people, they just kind of blindly follow celebrities and whatever, quote unquote, fake news source they listen to. And then if you try to argue with them and say, well, the science doesn't really stack up to back what you're listening to, they get very hostile about that. And so, and to Marshall's point, what do you say to somebody whose, family member died and it was, quote, a COVID case, and then they're very emotionally attached to the idea that please don't talk bad about, COVID or knock COVID because COVID is a real thing. How do you guys think this holding it out if it weren't for the fact that we're in a generation of kids who seem to be very influenced by celebrities and just sort of the wrong sources? They don't seem to care that much about the science. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I'll go first, and I want to hear what Shane has to say about it. The biggest thing that they counted on was the media. And under normal circumstances, the media would have been all over this because somebody would have wanted to break the story. As it turns out, we're going to be the first to break the story in this organized way, I think. Yes, that's kind of exciting. But somebody from the New York Times under normal circumstances would have said, this is how I'm going to end up writing a New York Times selling book. This is how I'm going to end up, getting to the top of the food chain. I'm going to expose these politicians and the terrible things they're doing. That didn't happen. They played along. So even if you had people who believed it, the whole thing would have come apart at some point in time because of media scrutiny, but that didn't happen. So Shane, what do you think about all of that?
Yeah, and actually I want to, maybe when I'm done here, revert back to you and talk about some of the things that we mentioned in the book regarding human behavior And, I don't necessarily want to just chastise millennials. We've seen this type of thing happen throughout history. You look at the history of socialism, you look at the history of communism, how it's all begun, and there is a system in place. And if you're familiar with Saul Alinsky, for example, I mean, he even wrote a book, Handbook for Radicals, about how to manipulate a population. And this is right out of that playbook. If you look at some of the things that Stalin did, if you look at some of the things that Hitler did, all these things in terms of population control and getting people to fall in line, and I know these are controversial statements, but, we don't say these things lightly. These are things, our resources are heavily cited, and we do a lot of deep digging to make sure that everything is legitimate. So, but there have been all kinds of behavioral experiments and things of that nature that Pam can probably go into in a little more detail than I can, regarding how it's been proven over time, the steps that need to be taken to manipulate a society.
Yeah, one example I'll give you, this will blow your mind, but I was when I was doing some research one morning, I actually accidentally came across this story, and it was about a high school teacher teaching history, and the kids in the class couldn't believe the Holocaust happened. I mean, they weren't questioning did it happen, they just couldn't, blew their mind. Like, how could people, citizens, have gone along with this? Because the Germans counted on the population to help them, and they had conditioned them over time to think that Jewish people were really the problem, so that by the time the Kristallnacht happened, citizens were standing in the street helping them. Yeah, you got to take these people away, they're vermin. Well, it takes, you can program people to think about anything. So anyway, he never said anything. This high school teacher didn't say anything to the students, but the next day when he came in, he said, we're going to have some new rules in the class. Like, when I come in the morning, everybody stands up and you have to say, good morning, Mr. Whoever. And then he showed him a salute. It's kind of a takeoff on the Nazi salute. And so he installed all these rituals. And then he also said, we're going to start, you can't hang around with more than one person at a time. And then the rules were even outside school. And then he started the kids snitching on each other. And it got to the place, it got out of hand within a week. It only took a week to get out of hand. And he finally brought everybody into the auditorium. It ended up being like a school assembly. And he explained what happened, that he had very gradually, and it only took a week or so to do, he'd gotten these kids to the place where they were turning on each other, and they actually thought that they had to follow the rules. You can only have two people standing together at a time. You can't have more than two at a locker. And every time the teacher comes in, you have to stand up and say these special things and all this kind of stuff. And he said, this is exactly how propaganda works. And you can very quickly get people to think, and people look around, they say, well, everybody else is doing this, so I'll fall in line too. So as Shane said, throughout history, this is the playbook. It's like these people read Mein Kampf and they studied Stalin and looked at all the despots of the world and said, yeah, this is how we do it. And they're doing it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's interesting because I think Jordan Peterson talks about it, how if you might be surprised that if you were a German in that era, you would likely be a Nazi as well. And a lot of people take offense to that, but it's kind of human nature to some degree. Going back to Shane's comment about the Saul Alinsky playbook, I think that's kind of my concern, is that it's almost not enough to come with the facts. Like, it sounds like and I have not read your entire book, obviously, but it sounds like you guys are going to be laying out a lot of compelling evidence that lines up logically and is statistically backed. But when you're living in an era of the Saul Alinsky playbook being played out to a T, as Shane's, not going to be enough.
Well, we'll hope so. I think humanity depends on
I'm
it.
sorry, the signal kind of failed a little bit, so I didn't hear your whole question. So I don't know if that was directed.
Yeah, that's okay. I'll repeat it. I'll repeat it. I was saying, to your point, Shane, that you mentioned the Saul Alinsky playbook and how that's sort of being played out to a T. And I totally agree with you 100%. My curiosity is that, you know, one of the sort of points of the Solinsky playbook is sort of that facts are irrelevant. If you can ridicule people into submission, that's almost enough to win the point and to get the media on your side and get the popularity on your side. And so in your guys' book, obviously you're laying out a lot of facts and you're laying a lot of compelling evidence, but in a society that is sort of, like you said, the Solinsky playbook, is that going to be enough to garner enough attention, do you think?
I think so. And you know, when you look at today's world and what we're dealing with right now, their viewpoint is the means justify the ends. Okay. You know, and I'll just say personally, as a Catholic Christian, that's not a viable point. Okay, that doesn't mean you can, if you have a belief and then, you know, you go out and commit some horrific thing that, you know, for what you believe is a greater good, it doesn't work that way. And that's what we're seeing right now with a lot of this stuff. So, no, and Saul Alinsky obviously is just one example. I mean, but, you know, and I don't know if you've read any of his stuff, but, you know, and there's some good documentaries out there on him as well. But will it be enough? I believe so. I think we're going to reach a lot of people on this, and our goal is to, you know, continue to go out. We've got a great publisher, and our goal is to go out and continue to do these types of interviews. And thank you again, by the way, for having us on. We appreciate that. And, you know, hopefully this will be the beginning of many. And, you know,
I'll piggyback on that. I think that the millennials are noisy right now. You know, the letters to the editor, part of it is that the preferential attention that's given to the mask wearing millennials. All right. So I would imagine there are a lot of angry people writing to our newspaper saying, my shop is closed, my kids are home from school and all that, but they don't print much of that. They're always printing we're home making cookies and wear your mask because I don't want you to kill my grandma kind of thing, because they're part of the whole deal. And so there is a growing group of people who are starting to understand something is terribly, terribly wrong. And remember what happened in 2016. Everybody knew Hillary Clinton was going to win because Trump couldn't possibly have any supporters, because all you ever heard was how great Hillary was, and she's ahead in the polls, and she's going to be great, and she's going to be president, and all you heard, and they were wrong. And already the Democrats are starting to talk about the fact that that they shouldn't be so confident. Already before even the nomination, the gap is starting to narrow in terms of Biden's lead over Trump in the polls. So they were terribly off in 2016, and I think they're terribly off here. They're underestimating that middle group, which is not moving toward the sheep; it's moving toward us. And these were people who in the beginning, you know, I was firmly over in this camp of this is wrong, something's terribly wrong. Shane was, his wife was. I mean, there were a group of us that knew this. Then you have the sheep, then you have the middle group. And it's like everything else, it's not any different than the election with the independents. The independents determine that election. The independents are going to determine the postmortem on this. And they're not going towards sheep, all right? Because what they're basically saying is, look, I thought there was a problem and I agreed to flatten the curve. And then, you know, we had to keep the hospitals open for COVID patients and all that. But we're 5 months past flattening the curve. Why is my store not open? Okay. Why am I wearing a mask and it's 110 degrees in the shade? All right. So that middle group is going to decide this, and they are not moving towards sheephood. That's not where they're going.
No, it's a little bit of what you said earlier, and I've said this to a lot of people. I mean, if you could just look at what's happening, you don't have to be a scientist, you don't have to be a biologist, you don't have to be a doctor to just look at, you know, behavior and just what's going around you to go, okay, I'm an educated person. You don't even have to be that educated to go, this doesn't make sense. Observant, yeah. I mean, hopefully even not that observant, just go, you know what, they said they wanted to flatten the curve and we accepted a month and it's gone into 5-6 months, and yeah, there's a lot of things that just aren't making sense and adding up. And so, yeah, that silent majority that is hopefully coming up out of the woodwork would be ideal to hopefully combat this. Be
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, and that silent majority is the same people that, I'm sorry to interrupt myself, but the
Go ahead.
same people, you know, I drive around my neighborhood and I see, you know, not to get too political here, but, you know, I see, you know, Joe Biden signs and things like that. Don't see a lot of Trump signs, but I always tell my wife and kids, I'm like, for every one Joe Biden sign, there's 5 quiet people that are going to vote for Trump. They're not putting their signs out because they know they'll probably be torn down. So, you know, that's relevant to this conversation. I mean, to your point, I mean, you know, with all this stuff that's going on, and again, the virus will magically disappear after November 4th. So,
yeah, and it's a little bit of I mean, you talked about the good things that are coming out from this. I mean, one of the things that I hope comes from this, and you know, we're in like the heart of it in Portland, where it's just absolutely insane when it comes to national news about what they're doing and burning the city to the ground. You know, standing up for your beliefs. You know, I mean, it's whether it's political or whether it's you know, spiritual or whatever it is. You know, have some convictions and stand up for them. And right now, it's super scary to do. Whether you are a Trump supporter or whether you're a cop supporter, or whether you're just, you know, I want to defend my city supporter in Portland. Some of those people just say, hey, I want to live here, and they get ridiculed. But I mean, it's nerve-wracking to even just say, hey, I stand up for the police. And so right now, hopefully that's something that comes up from this, that you get a new generation of people going, you know what, it's okay to speak my mind, even if I might get ridiculed for it or something thrown at me.
Well, everything, you know, one of the things I keep talking about, this overplaying the hand, and all the despots are overplaying their hand. And so one of the things that I've talked with some of my conservative friends about for a long time is the fact that the people preaching to us about tolerance have no tolerance. Okay. In other words, we're supposed to be tolerant of all their ideas, but put the MAGA hat on and you know, we're going to slash your tires and, you know, throw eggs at your house or whatever. So they have no tolerance. And we've known that for a long time. But now what's happening is they're displaying their lack of tolerance in such a bigger way. It's so much more obvious. So what COVID has done is everything that's wrong, the media, government, and the citizenry being not very educated, the education system, the medical system, everything that I've been talking about, and a lot of people have been talking about, and Shane's been talking about for years, it's like it was on steroids now. It's just bigger, it's more obvious. And so, and this is where I think that middle group, the people getting motivated. I get emails every day from people saying, I'm taking the red pill. We all know what that means, right? I've never voted for, it happened in 2016, but it's going to happen bigger in 2020, I think, where people are just saying, you know, I was kind of content with liberal life in California, but right now, liberal life in California is awful. In Oregon, it's awful. In Washington State, it's awful.
And I think in Portland is a good sort of microcosm for the nation to some degree, because it's a traditionally heavy left-leaning city. And I think it's parsing out the more centrist liberals from the really extremists. And I think that you're right, that we're going to see one byproduct of this, I pray, is that the silent majority that we're all hoping for comes out of the woodworks again and does it in November. But I think that also, I think it's going to, as you said, red pill. A lot of people are going to go, yeah, I can't be a part of that anymore. And I'm hoping that's a long lasting effect, because Portland is a very scary place to be in. My wife is from New Jersey and she loves Portland and she thinks it's a great city, but I haven't been there. I mean, I work there, kind of the outskirts, but I won't go there. I just won't go there. Just being a white male without even advertising what my political beliefs are. And it's a scary place. So my hope is that you guys are right. I am curious. I don't think we touched on this. When is the book actually being released?
That's a good question.
I think it's like end of September or before, but end of September.
Okay.
So
and where can people pick the book up if they
we're
want?
in the editing phase right now.
Yeah.
So, but we've got everything written. We're just getting everything edited. So, you know, obviously there's some lag time in terms of getting it submitted to the publisher and and then getting it produced. But there'll be an e-version and as well as hard copies.
I do love that you guys are willing to come on and your point of views, and it's very diverse, and I would be excited to bring you guys circle back to this conversation after your book's been out for maybe like a month, you know,
Sure.
to kind of see where we're at now, and it'd be great to see where the economy's at, where the pandemic's at, and where your book's at. That'd be kind of fun.
I'd love that. Thanks.
And it's likely that there's a good chance that there will be a sequel to this book.
Yeah.
So,
Well, there will be a lot
I
to
like
write
it.
about. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, there is. I know.
Uh,
Thank you guys.
thank
Thank
you.
you, Shane.
All right. Bye.
Thank you.